from... Okay, this is Jonathan Foreman, who is a critic and has written a book, actually. Jonathan, would you like to tell them your book?
No.
No, it's okay. And Anya is from Germany. We're waiting for Mr. Mahmood Jamal, but we'll start. We're going to be talking about writing the world, and the question I wanted to put forward to the people on the panel was the concept of how we feel that literature bridges cultural divides and gives you an interesting depiction of reality, but symbols often don't translate across cultures. And who speaks for whom is the question I wanted to ask them. Assalamu alaikum, Mr. John.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, if that's possible. Yes, please. So, does anybody want to start on that, please, Jonathan? You were going to talk about the concept of who speaks for whom across the globe in literature.
Well, I thought we sometimes burden literature by expecting too much of it, too much of books and too much of authors. It's slightly unfair to expect a writer based in Pakistan who writes novels that are set in Pakistan to tell us everything about the country, everything about its crisis. Novelists write novels about things that interest them, and we can sometimes expect too much. It's also today we live in a rather confusing era in that where questions of identity are not clear. We have the people who are claimed as Pakistani writers or as Indian writers. Are they, what makes you a Pakistani writer? Is it that you are born in Pakistan? Is it that you write about Pakistan? What if you are like some of the authors here, a Pakistani writer who writes about New York? And you could even take a novel like The Reluctant Fundamentalist. What does it tell you about Pakistan? Is it representative of anything beyond the thoughts and prejudices of one man or his class, perhaps? Does it really tell you a great deal about Pakistan? And does it matter if it doesn't? Does it matter if he's only representing the point of view of a very small group of people and not Pakistan as a whole, or middle class or working class Pakistanis? Does it matter that he comes from a very small, westernized, English-speaking group of people? It's still interesting, it's still a pleasure, but certainly people in the West would be wrong if they thought that they would learn a great deal about Pakistan from a book like The Reluctant Fundamentalist. That doesn't mean it's any less valuable, but what it does mean is that the old cliche that literature helps us understand other cultures can be taken too far. Maybe it just helps us understand other people and other writers. So that's what I thought I'd start with.
What about you, Anya? Do you agree that it's hard to define what makes a writer, what makes a Pakistani writer, what makes a German writer, what makes a European writer in general?
I think the question of definition is always difficult to answer, but I was just talking to one of the authors here, and she mentioned that I said that I was amazed by the political efforts that I see in Pakistani contemporary literature. And I said, why is it that everybody here seems to be so political? And in a way, she said I was right, because everybody is just confronted with these political patterns all day, and I think even the daily discussions are on politic topics are on a very high level. But then she said she was a juror of a writing competition, Pakistani writing competition, and that the best stories were not that political, and that also it might be a question of publishing, that these very political stories are more requested by the West. So yeah, that might be a problem. But I think, yeah, and to define the European writing is, I think, very difficult. I just know that in Germany we have a very different literature tradition, which sort of goes back to the Second World War, and afterwards we had a lot of very formal patterns, and literature was not meant to be very narrative anymore. So we have a lot of very formal experimental literature, which influenced the narrative literature a lot as well. So I think what you can see is that where I come from, literature is very concerned with language and dealing with, like, yeah, trying to create a very tight language. But at the same time, I think there's this political and broadened view is somehow missing in it as well. So I think if these sort of streams would come together, it would be a very good influence, and not the Germans or the French or Central Europeans can't just hide in their nutshell and pretend to be on that safe European boat. But but I think the Pakistani literature is very vivid these days, and I'm quite impressed.
Mr. Jamal, would you like to add something to that, please?
Yes, talking about identity as a writer. You see, the Indians think I'm Pakistani, the Pakistanis think I'm Indian, the Brits think I'm Asian, and Americans, well, I don't have much to do with them. But the whole point is, perhaps it's to do with my own particular history. I've always been an immigrant of one kind or the other due to the historical situation. So, but I have decided that I'm going to, since I've been living in the UK for the last 40 years, I started writing my poetry in English. And one day somebody came and said, look, we are collecting poems about London, so we'd like you to look into your work and see if there's a poem, and there were none. Then somebody said, well, we are trying to collect a thing about Pakistan. Have you got any poems in relation to Pakistan? And I said, no, I'm afraid I haven't. So for me, whatever the reason is, I've not had a place in my work. I don't write about place, I write about people. And my poetry is mainly a conversation with people. So in that sense, I have no work which can identify me as a Pakistani poet, except that I love Pakistan and I feel myself to be a Pakistani. Now, of course, I feel that one of the difficulties posed when people write in English is that they are writing about one group of people for another. And that is a very difficult and serious issue, because there are a lot of writers who are writing in English about, let's say, Pakistan, but it seems that they are writing not for the Pakistanis, but for somebody else, i.e. the international English-speaking audience. Now, that has certain advantages of objectivity, and it has certain disadvantages. And the disadvantage is that you tend to pander to what your international audience wants to hear. And therefore, you're unable to create something which is very, very deep in terms of your own culture and society. So this problem continues, and I feel that somehow, at some point, people will be able to resolve it in some way. But I also feel that this kind of writing has its value. It is very interesting in many ways because it is coming from a different space. So I'm not trying to run it down, but I do feel that it has its problems and it has its weaknesses in terms of being sort of constantly tempted to cater to the market and therefore ignoring certain aspects of the culture or highlighting certain aspects, you know. So, you know, that's my opening comment anyway.
Okay, thank you. Well, the audience and market is absolutely crucial as well for the writer. And I'm just wondering, in your case, as someone who writes in many places, you said you're a poet in English, but also Pakistani and also British. Would it change if you were started writing poetry in Urdu?
I think it will, yes, but because I don't live here, I don't speak much Urdu, although I have a good knowledge of the language. My thinking and the experiences that I have, if I were living here, would definitely revert back to Urdu, but I haven't lived here long enough for myself to make that easy transition, you know?
Okay. Yes.
I mean, you know, what we're talking about here are questions of sensibility, questions of language, questions of the audience, and they're very interesting and very complex ones. I mean, in the sense that you could argue that Pakistani fiction, compared to Indian fiction, in English, has a very special kind of engaged quality because of the crisis in Pakistan. And that's why, even though there are a great many more books written in English in India, there are very few that match the quality of the best Pakistani writing that's coming out now. On the other hand, in India at the same time, there's a lot more publishing in the various minority languages, which gets a lot more attention. And up to now, certainly in the West, there isn't that much access to translations of Urdu work. There's no one who can read it, of course. And of course, we never hear about writers in any other languages that are spoken here. Baluch, if there are any novels written in Baluch, I don't know. But it does raise these very interesting questions. I mean, I would understand a lot more about Pakistan if I could read Urdu and Urdu literature. On the other hand, you've got people who read and write English as a native language, and they can convey a great deal, and I can understand the nuances there. But it does often feel that as a foreigner, in a world in which English is the dominant literary language and is written by people who aren't from Britain, that one is forever going to be missing out on the nuances of the various countries where people write. I mean, it's one of the things about language. You know, the more certainly poetry in particular, one is forever excluded from the real intimacy that people feel when they're reading and writing it in their native language. Does that mean we should abandon communicating through fiction? Of course not. It's just one of those slightly sad facts of literary life. And those of you who can read literature in different languages have an enormous advantage.
I would like to add something to the question you just raised, Mr. Jamal, because I think what you mentioned, that people are constantly tempted to capture a certain market, and it's sort of the same everywhere, but I think we have the same problem over where we live, and but I think what would be an achievement would be sort of a balance. Like if people sort of stick to their own stories, and if there's a good story in between all of this, I think you can actually include a lot of political stuff and a lot of a lot of facts that might be required, but still write a very good story, or even I think for poetry it might work differently, but maybe the connecting point would really be where it sort of melts together as a